Tom Cruise is not just a Hollywood star, but also the epitome of unwavering devotion to film. He is the eternal maverick of Top Gun, the fearless Ethan Hunt of Mission Impossible, and the fiery soul of Jerry Maguire. He has risked his career, his body, and even his soul for over 40 years in order to give viewers moments that will never be forgotten on screen. His career is nothing less than a love letter written in blood, sweat, and fire, from clinging to skyscrapers with his bare hands to giving unvarnished, Oscar-worthy performances in Born on the 4th of July. A man who is tormented by broken love and estranged daughter, and the depths of loneliness is hidden behind the roaring applause and the billion-dollar blockbusters. His once bright face is now marked with agony. And as he enters his twilight years at age 63, Tom Cruise's tragedy seems more devastating than ever. Will Tom Cruise ever find peace? Is a question that remains relevant today. Or will he be trapped in his own misery for all eternity? Please remember to hit like before we start, as this video will transport you back in time to any memories you may have of Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, or Katie Holmes. Every great star has a secret injury, and for Tom Cruise, those were childhood wounds that fame would never heal. He was born into hunger, fear, and the sound of doors slamming in rage rather than privilege or safety. Tom Cruise was born on July 3, 1962 in Syracuse, New York, into a world where instability was commonplace and stability was only a passing rumor. He was a young boy wearing shoes that were so worn they hardly held together. He would later vividly recall the father who ran the household as a coward and a bully, a man who taught him suspicion rather than protection. Don't believe him. Never put your trust in anyone. Mary Lee, his mother, worked herself to the bone, taking on any job she could to support her 4 children, 3 daughters and her only son. She was tired and embarrassed that even on her worst days, she was unable to put food on the plates, and Tom would often watch her sob quietly at the kitchen table. There was sometimes no dinner at all. On other evenings, it was just stale bread or popcorn. Meal-by-meal survival was pieced together. Instead, the boy who yearned for safety discovered that love occasionally entails bearing weights that are too great for a youngster to handle. When Mary Lee finally found the strength to leave the man who had destroyed their home, the marriage fell apart. When he was still adrift, Tom, who was hardly a teenager, took on the role of protector and tried to be a quiet anchor for his sisters. The family moved north to Ottawa in 1971, which was another strange school in another city, and he experienced a miracle on a tiny classroom stage. For the first time, the fear subsided under the lights as he pretended to be someone else, as if performance were the only place he could breathe. However, hope was short-lived. Due to his mother's difficulties, his father's absence, and the ongoing turmoil, Tom had attended 15 different schools by the time he turned 18. There was a reset button in each hallway. A ghost left behind every friendship. Every action served as a reminder that nothing in his world remained the same. A scar that would reverberate throughout every chapter of the boy's life. The boy who had once dreamed of stability, instead learned to live with impermanence. The fight was even more intense inside those classrooms. Every page became an enemy due to undiagnosed dyslexia. Struggle was mistaken for laziness by teachers. His classmates made fun of his hesitancy, and he waged an unnamed war in silence. "I felt stupid," he said candidly years later. "I thought I had failed my mother." That shame turned into a wound that was unseen by others but carried a relentless weight. Desperate for safety, Tom turned to his faith when he was 14 years old and enrolled in a Cincinnati Catholic seminary with the goal of becoming a priest. He held on to the hope that this could be the peace he so desperately needed for a brief year. However, even this was lost. According to some, the family relocated once more. His expulsion was sealed when others whispered about a stolen bottle of liquor. The door slammed shut regardless of the truth, and the loss was more intense because peace had been promised. Nevertheless, he was not broken by these tragedies. They constructed him. He wouldn't stay the hungry kid who was made fun of for stumbling over his words. He created survival strategies out of desperation, such as color-coding his scripts, recording lines, and pacing incessantly until the words that had previously escaped him became automatic. His humiliation turned into discipline. His embarrassment turned into accuracy. He became as hard as a drill after each setback. Every humiliation serves as a practice run for endurance. The boy who shuffled from school to school with nothing stable underfoot learned to adapt like a soldier, to take on responsibility that was beyond his years, to prepare for the abyss of loneliness and to keep going. You can still see the shadow of that boy from Syracuse and Ottawa who knew pain well, who carried scars from every cruel classroom, every empty pantry, and every night when safety was only a rumor. If you look closely at the legend who came later, the man who clung to the side of a plane, who dangled from skyscrapers, who broke bones, and who defied death for the sake of film, it is also heartbreaking and motivational. Tom Cruise was not destroyed by those beginnings. He was forged by them, and all of his childhood scars turned into the fire that drove him to be unrelenting. He would live a lifetime demonstrating that nothing, not even fate, not fear or hunger, could stop him. So in 1980, a restless young man with nothing more than $500 in his pocket, a battered suitcase that shook with every step, and a dream so fragile it might have broken in his hands, boarded a Greyhound bus headed for New York, leaving behind his storm-tossed childhood. But he held on to it like oxygen. Unnamed and untested, he was 18 years old and had already endured humiliation, hunger, and the ongoing pain of being uprooted. He now had to deal with a city that ate dreamers for breakfast. During the day, he carried the bags of strangers, cleaned restaurant floors, and grinned for much-needed tips. He slept in small rooms where the rent seemed unaffordable, and the silence pressed against him like an enemy as he hurried from audition to audition at night. But his first art had always been survival, and he used it as a weapon in New York, telling himself over and over again that if the universe ever gave him a single chance, he would make it matter. Endless Love brought that opportunity in 1981, a role that should have faded into the background. With barely a few lines, was tackled with such passion by Tom that casting directors scrawled his name in the margins. Taps arrived months later. He had been hired as background, a boy with no voice, but he played the part so fiercely that the director rewrote the script, pulling him into the spotlight. A raw, restless energy that was uncontrollable was what Hollywood saw. For the first time, the child who was made fun of in class for having trouble pronouncing words was no longer invisible. He left a lasting impression. The tide was turning by 1983. He stood side by side with future icons and the outsiders. But his restless fire would not go out, not even among them. However, lightning struck in risky business later that year. Cruise brought charm and danger to the role of Joel Goodson, the impulsive teen who uses rebellion to survive. Then it happened. The dance in his panties, shirt undone, sunglasses flashing in the vintage rock and roll light. The brief encounter altered everything. America wasn't merely observing a young performer. They were witnessing a seismic shift in culture. Tom Cruise rose to fame overnight. However, the old war continued to rage behind the curtain. Every script became a battleground for dyslexics. Every page was a shadowy wall. He battled for hours what others absorbed in minutes. He created his own toolkit, which included color-coded pages, hours of recordings, and constant pacing until the words became ingrained in his body. What had once made him feel inferior became his technique. His strength came from what had once embarrassed him. "Acting saved me," he would confess years later. The harsher and more inspirational truth is that he and his performances were saved by survival itself. Hollywood saw a rising star by the time Risky Business's credits rolled. Those who looked more closely, however, saw something more profound. A young man who had transformed every scar from his early years into motivation, every humiliation into drive, and every empty dinner plate into a desire for greatness. The alchemy of pain forged into precision was what the world mistakenly believed to be natural talent. The legend of Tom Cruise was already roaring to life, unrelenting, unforgettable, and unavoidable, even though The Boy from Syracuse had only just begun. It's not easy for Hollywood to crown its kings. They must bleed first. For his crown, Tom Cruise also bled. Once stumbling over words, the boy now flew through the air as Pete Maverick Mitchell in Top Gun, a role he not only played, but lived. A phenomenon that sparked a culture. Cruise became the face of American confidence overnight as the movie blew up the box office. Ray-Ban aviators disappeared from stores, and Navy recruitment skyrocketed. But there was a rumble of uncertainty beneath the roar. Was he just another attractive face propelled by pop music and jet engines? A transient poster boy who will eventually fade? The real fight was just getting started for Tom. He chose to walk into the fire with the color of money, standing in the shadow of one of cinema's immortals, Paul Newman, rather than chasing safe millions. Many believed it to be a move that would destroy his career. Weakness would be brutally revealed next to Newman. Cruise, however, wasn't going to mince words. He did some studying. He hurried. He grabbed each frame. While Newman took home an Oscar, Cruise took away something more permanent: respect. He was an actor who demanded to be taken seriously, not just the kid who danced in his panties. The tests continued. He ran the risk of completely vanishing with Rain Man, especially when contrasted with Dustin Hoffman's imposing performance. Claiming attention would have been an easy mistake, but Cruise made the more difficult decision to exercise restraint. Steady, grounded, and human, he became the film's spine, bringing the audience through Hoffman's storm. Hoffman won the Academy Award, but moviegoers knew that Cruise's unseen work was what completed the masterpiece. Then came Born on the 4th of July, where he played Ron Kovic, the part that almost broke him. Cruise took away all of Maverick's swagger to play a paralyzed Vietnam veteran whose life had fallen apart in agony and anger. He pushed his body and soul until despair was ingrained in his bones during months of wheelchair training. It was the first time I had to open myself up emotionally in ways I never had before, he later admitted. He screamed, sobbed, and fell on screen, raw in ways viewers had never seen him do. Hollywood's golden boy giving up glitz for sorrow was an incredible risk. However, it paid off. In addition to accolades, he gained recognition for his willingness to compromise his reputation in the name of truth. Tom Cruise underwent a transformation in the ensuing 10 years. He faced off against Jack Nicholson's raging rage in A Few Good Men, and did not bat an eyelid, leaving a lasting impression on the world of film's most iconic courtroom confrontations. Even before the cameras started rolling, Anne Rice criticized his casting in Interview with the Vampire, and critics were honing their craft. However, Cruise immersed himself in the part to such an extent that Rice retracted his statement in a full-page apology ad upon the film's release. His signature move, Scorn, had evolved into triumph. Then came the clap of Jerry Maguire in Mission Impossible. He was no longer merely performing in Mission Impossible. He was also producing, shedding blood for a franchise that no one thought could last. He ran across rooftops, dangled from wires, and pulled stunts that made studios shudder. He was a spy. He wasn't just acting like one. He showed another face with Jerry Maguire, human, aching, vulnerable. Show Me the Money turned into a national anthem. Behind the catchphrase, however, was a man who was shaky in search of meaning and love. Another nomination for an Oscar. One more Golden Globe. He had simultaneously achieved success in the box office and as an artist, but he still wouldn't stop. He defied expectations in Magnolia by playing the role of toxic motivational speaker Frank T.J. Mackey, whose bluster hardly concealed wounds as raw as his own. It was eerie, eruptive, and fractured, and it brought him not only accolades but also the reluctant respect of critics who had previously mocked him. Every victory was risky throughout. Every applause concealed a bruise. Where audiences saw charm, Cruise felt the consequences. His body's bruises, the pressure of expectation, and the ongoing fear of being exposed. These struggles, standing in Newman's shadow, carrying Hoffman's story, breaking himself as Kovic, defying Rice, sparring with Nicholson, and bleeding for Mission Impossible, were what made him a legend. If Top Gun was the reason he became famous. However, the ground beneath him grew more precarious the higher he climbed. Hollywood was under his control, but storms were already building in the background, waiting to see how much even Tom Cruise could take. Tom Cruise entered a phase of his career that initially appeared promising, but would permanently change the course of his private life at the height of his early fame, when Top Gun had made him Hollywood's most bankable young star. The boyish energy that still characterized Cruise in the public eye was starkly contrasted with the poise and experience of Mimi Rogers, an actress 6 years his senior, whom he married in 1987. Despite the brief 3-year marriage, its impact would go well beyond romance, because Mimi was the one who initially introduced him to Scientology, a path that would influence not only his professional life, but also his most personal decisions in the decades that followed. This relationship was more than just love for Cruise. After spending his youth in constant motion, it was his first attempt to create permanence. In Hollywood circles, Rogers was already well-connected, older, and grounded. She appeared to him as a safe haven, providing the stability and maturity he had craved since he was a young boy. Later, he acknowledged that he was attracted to her independence and keen intelligence, which both challenged and reassured him, but stability eluded him. Between movie sets, premieres, and the crushing burden of being Hollywood's new golden boy, Cruise was ensnared in the unrelenting spotlight of superstardom. Meanwhile, Mimi had to deal with the silent stress of being bound to someone whose notoriety was soaring through the stratosphere. Their lives frequently followed parallel paths that hardly ever intersected. The distance between them in terms of age, perspective, and speed grew over time until it was impossible to close. By 1990, the marriage had ended amicably, with minimal drama but with a clear sense of closure. The world conjectured, but the reality was more straightforward and depressing. The center had failed. But what was left was legacy, not scandal. Mimi introduced Cruise to Scientology, a religion she was fervently devoted to at the time. The lessons provided structure, discipline, and a sense of belonging for Tom, who had struggled with dyslexia and a persistent sense of dislocation since he was a young child. This move became one of the most pivotal moments in his life, impacting his art, relationships, and public persona, regardless of whether it was perceived by others as controversial or compelling. In retrospect, the marriage to Mimi Rogers is seen as short but significant. It was the point at which Tom Cruise's narrative became entwined with issues of faith, conviction, and destiny, rather than being solely about fame and cinematic triumph. Their love ended, but its impact lasted forever. That brief chapter served as a reminder that sometimes the most silent connections produce the loudest reverberations, igniting forces that would follow him throughout his life and help to shape the legend he would become. Tom Cruise appeared to have it all on movie sets, where he was surrounded by bright lights and applause from strangers. He continued to pursue stability, the one thing his upbringing had denied him despite his brief marriage to Mimi Rogers. He thought he had found it on the set of Days of Thunder. Nicole Kidman stabilized the room in addition to brightening the screen. The world's noise faded with her. Their wedding in 1990 was more than just a Hollywood production. Tom vowed that this time, love would not break and the house would not move. Joy seemed natural in the early years. Connor and Isabella were adopted by them. School photos were on the refrigerator. Children's jackets were in the hallway. The kitchen table was strewn with scripts. They became accustomed to each other's rhythms, his late-night pacing with color-marked lines, her morning laugh. Red carpets made a lot of noise. Takeout boxes, notes scrawled in the margins, and the gentle flicker of a lamp as they turned it off together every night were all examples of the real music in the everyday. Finally, it felt like permanence to the boy from drifting homes. The first fracture followed by a hospital hallway, cautious conversations, and the word ectopic, which no couple wants to hear. They had drawn the future, muttered names, painted rooms, and folded it in on itself. Nicole's sorrow was a tempest that subsided in quiet. In a way no role had prepared him for. Tom, who had envisioned fatherhood as a means of redemption, felt helpless. On-screen heroes always came to the rescue. All he could do was sit next to her bed and hold a hand that he was unable to heal. As usual, work kept calling, but something had changed in the house. Plans were put on hold, drawers were only partially filled, and hope was dismissed. They hoped in silence when Nicole became pregnant again. Every heartbeat was considered a miracle. Calendar squares were circled and tiny garments were folded away. The air felt lighter for 3 months. Then it was over. There was silence when the miscarriage struck, like a lamp blown out. Only a crib that was never used and a kitchen chair that was pushed back but empty were mentioned in the absence's headlines. Nicole turned inward, her sorrow a personal sea. As though movement could shield him, Tom turned outward and threw himself into his work. The hush that would not go away now hung over the house that had once promised permanence. They grieved in different ways. He ran faster and she withdrew. This disparity started to create silent rifts of separation between them, exacerbated by movie sets, advisors, and the unrelenting pressure of two advancing careers. Where the heart was most vulnerable, what had begun as a dream of permanence broke, and now Tom, who had sworn never to let his childhood chaos happen again, could feel the specter of fracture returning to his house. The once unshakable marriage did not gradually fall apart by 2001. In a single shock, sudden, quick, and devastating, it broke. It was shocking to the world. Overnight, the golden couple fell apart. The floor seemed to disappear under Nicole's feet. She was a mother and a wife once. The next, she was gazing into an unfathomable void. For Tom, it was the breakdown of the promise he had held on to the most tenaciously, that he would create a family that would never fall apart, and that he would never experience the turmoil of his early years again. Permanence, which he had thought was finally his, had slipped through his hands like smoke. At the time, rumors circulated about choices that led them down different paths, walls that rose silently, and differences that love could not overcome. One of those walls was reportedly Tom's growing adherence to Scientology, which Nicole was unable to overcome. The gradual, painful separation from Isabella and Connor, the kids she had once cherished and whose laughter had once made their home seem indestructible, was the price she could not bear. The price was no less harsh for Tom. He became the parent who stayed. But staying meant answering the questions, keeping the silence, and carrying the weightless burden of explaining to two young people why the family they trusted had fallen apart. The destruction was not featured in headlines or documented in court documents. It resided in their home's silence, a script on the counter that no one bothered to read, toys that were cleaned but unopened, and an empty chair at the dinner table. Tom saw the divorce as more than just the dissolution of his marriage. It was the fall of the only stronghold he had erected to ward off the specters of his history. He had vowed as a boy never to be his father, and never to lead a broken household. He now stood amidst the wreckage of his own vow, understanding that silence and time can test even the most resolute promises. The timing was what made it cruel. Oscar nominations, box office dominance, and critical acclaim were all signs that Tom was at the top of his game. He could cling to airplanes, climb skyscrapers, and control Hollywood. But he was helpless where it counted most. He could receive crowns from fame, but his family's brittle walls would not be protected. No discipline could prevent love from shattering when its foundation cracked, even though he had perfected tricks that defied gravity. In retrospect, the 10 years he spent with Nicole continue to rank among the most painful periods of his life. A loss so great that it will always cast a shadow, and a love so bright that it can illuminate the entire world. It was more than just the pain of seeing his family fall apart for Tom. It was the stinging realization that losing her was a failure of his own as well, the one thing he was unable to win. That was a very difficult time, he said quietly years later. It was probably the most difficult thing I've ever experienced. His voice was that of a man admitting the ruins of the dream he believed would save him, not the defiance of a movie hero. Nicole's pain was an additional, even more severe wound. She suffered the unfathomable separation from her beloved children in the aftermath, a wound that no mother should ever have to endure. It took me a very long time to heal, she would later admit. I was taken aback. I believed it would go on forever. Even years later, her voice was still tinged with disbelief, demonstrating just how abrupt and confusing the collapse was. The absence of her children's everyday laughter, as well as the empty rooms, caused her to feel a silence that went beyond what a headline could convey. Tom, who once thought he could protect the people he loved from pain, had to face the reality that his decisions and his world had left scars on both her and his lives. He had been crowned by fame, but that didn't change the fact that, in his own words, he was helpless when it came to what really mattered. And Nicole's sorrow, expressed with her shuddering candor, demonstrated that even in the glittering glare of Hollywood, there are scars that no amount of attention can hide. It is an indisputable and cruel truth. The suffering we inflict on people we love can sometimes be our greatest regrets, rather than the things we lose. That's why this chapter hurts so much. The tale of two stars being destroyed by forces greater than themselves is not the only one. It tells the tale of a man who, despite his wealth and fame, discovered that even legends have to live with the ghosts of the families they were unable to save, and that even the most brilliant crowns cannot shield a frail heart. The fact that greatness is never solely determined by triumphs but also by the silent reckonings with those we are unable to retain may be the most human truth of all. Tom Cruise appeared to be a man lost in the ruins of his marriage to Nicole Kidman, bearing the burden of broken promises and a broken family. However, Penelope Cruz entered that quiet. She looked like a spark on the set of Vanilla Sky in 2001, bright, playful, and grounding all at once. After months of darkness, Tom later acknowledged that meeting her at that precise moment felt like a light coming back on. Penelope became more than just a co-star for a man who had just witnessed the collapse of his world. She was a balm, a soft reminder that laughter could still break through sadness and that love could still be tender. Under Hollywood's unrelenting scrutiny, their relationship developed. It was disarmingly easy, though, away from the cameras. Two actors strolling hand in hand through new cities, eating quietly together and exchanging tales about fear, desire, and the obstinate hope that love would bring them stability instead of fame. Tom respected her artistic ability, fierce independence, and refusal to let his shadow limit her. In return, she gave him stillness, the gift of a woman who could see the restless boy underneath the world-famous star. They attempted to construct a life together for 3 years, covering unhealed wounds with patches of happiness. However, genuine affection is not always able to overcome the seriousness of conviction. Penelope was unable to overcome Tom's growing devotion to Scientology, which had influenced his sense of discipline and community. She respected his path but was unable to follow it herself, according to friends who knew her. As a result, they ended things quietly, without fanfare or public resentment in 2004. Just two individuals realizing what love couldn't do on its own. For Tom, it wasn't a scandal or a fiery conclusion, but rather the more subdued sadness of realizing that permanence can still elude one's heart, even when it dares to open again. Another chapter folded into memory as another door closed. In a subtle way, this love also taught us that even the most gentle healing isn't always enough to change the past, and that sometimes losing love to difference rather than anger is the hardest truth. The moment Tom Cruise jumped onto Oprah's couch in 2005 will always be remembered by the world. Millions saw it as a spectacle. For Tom, it was something else entirely. The unadulterated outburst of a man who was certain that he had discovered eternity. Brighter, younger, and full of hope for a fresh start, Katie Holmes had entered his life. For a while, the glow seemed unbreakable as the media hailed them as Hollywood's royal couple, Tomcat. For Tom, whose life had been characterized by broken promises and broken homes, Katie was a symbol of rebirth and an opportunity to put an end to the specters of transience. "I'm deeply in love," he said. "I'm so happy," and he meant it. Their fairy tale wedding in an Italian castle in 2006 featured flashing bulbs, $3.5 million, and rituals that spoke of eternity. It was pure magic to outsiders. It was real permanence to Tom. Their daughter Suri had been born only months prior, and for the first time he was pictured holding a tiny life in his arms, rather than a script or a stunt. In those pictures, his eyes softened, and the daredevil was replaced by a father who whispered futures that only she could hear. Later, Katie remembered being a mother. "It's the best present." Fatherhood was a means of atonement for Tom, an opportunity to create the secure home he had previously been denied. Shadows, however, infiltrated behind closed doors as the fairy tale played out in public. Having grown up with Tom posters on her bedroom wall, Katie now lived in a blinding glare that left little room for her. Friends described how her world tightened and her circle shrank until every decision felt scrutinized. Where Katie felt confined, Tom saw order because he was devoted to the structures he believed in. She occasionally perceived what he called commitment as control. They loved Suri. However, their marriage shifted from being about a partnership to being about surviving in a spotlight that never went away. Nobody, least of all Tom, anticipated the breakup that occurred in 2012 just before his 50th birthday. Quiet and methodical, Katie secretly planned her departure. Determined above all to keep her daughter safe, she contacted attorneys using a disposable phone. The marriage ended in 11 days. It was shocking to the world. In an instant, the golden couple fell apart. It was escape for Katie. It was destruction to Tom. He would later confess, "I didn't see it coming," his words as stark as the silence that ensued. At home, gravity had blindsided the man who had defied gravity on screen. The distance they created between him and his daughter was more painful than the actual divorce papers. Primary custody was given to Katie. Bound by law and love, Tom supported Suri with $400,000 annually until she turned 18. It was accountability on paper. It was absence in life. He gradually faded into the background of her daily life. Once cradled against his chest, the young girl now grew up in pictures he saw from a distance. Birthdays celebrated with calendar reminders and discreetly sent checks rather than his embrace. Every decision Katie made was based on her commitment. "My child comes first." Every year that passed between them was a reminder to Tom that permanence had once again eluded him, a reverberation of his childhood vow eroding. And it was more than just legal ink on a page when Suri decided to adopt her mother's last name in 2024. It was the silent, terrible breaking of a thread he thought would never break. In retrospect, Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes' romance is more than just a glamorous romance or a tabloid bust. Blinding in its joy, devastating in its loss, it is the quintessential paradox of love. For Tom, it was evidence that the brittle walls of family cannot be maintained by the biggest stunts, the biggest salaries, or the loudest cheers. For Katie, it was having the guts to start a new life for her child, and it turned into Suri's silent right to define herself, even if it meant removing herself from a legendary figure's shadow. The hardest truth in Tom Cruise's story may be that the most amazing jumps aren't done on film sets but rather in love, where there are no safety harnesses or retakes, and sometimes the fall leaves scars that the camera won't ever see. The rifts in Tom Cruise's private life seemed intolerable after his marriage to Katie Holmes ended, and his separation from his daughter became the most painful scar of all. However, those rifts quickly permeated his public life. For the first time in decades, the man who had scaled every mountain of fame was falling in the eyes of those who once unquestioningly supported him, not on box office charts. The storm started in 2005. Tom voiced his disapproval of actress Brooke Shields' choice to take medicine for postpartum depression that spring. His remarks were harsh and unyielding, and the reaction was swift. Later, Shields retorted that empathy and understanding were the most important things new moms needed. The interaction seemed startling to viewers who had long appreciated Tom's charm, as if the hero's mask had broken. A few months later, he and Matt Lauer got into a heated argument about psychiatry on NBC's Today Show. Many were surprised by his intensity on air. Some perceived it as arrogance, while others saw it as conviction, as evidence that charisma can turn sour when filtered through controversy rather than film. The clip played repeatedly, his rising voice cemented in the public consciousness. The couch, which was supposed to display new love, then appeared on Oprah's stage. Tom leaped to his feet and dropped to one knee while pumping his fists. He perceived it as physical joy, happiness too great to remain motionless. He exclaimed, beaming like a man who had discovered eternal love, "I'm in love." However, mania existed before the term viral was coined. The clip went around the world. Late-night hosts used him as a joke throughout the night. His devotion to parody was diminished by online forums. His joy was genuine and the love was real. However, laughter left him with a caricature that he was unable to remove. His career itself was affected by the fallout by 2006. His 14-year studio home, Paramount Pictures, terminated their collaboration. His marketability was harmed by unusual behavior, according to executives. It was more than just a lost contract for Tom, who had owned franchises worth billions of dollars. The crown was slipping. He was suddenly portrayed as unpredictable and out of touch, a warning that even the brightest stars could fall. He was the embodiment of American confidence. On sets, the attacks persisted. His intensity made people uneasy. Because of the pressure he demanded, Thandie Newton acknowledged that working with him on Mission Impossible 2 was frightening. He allegedly got into a fight with Russell Crowe during The Mummy. Mickey Rourke brushed him off as unimportant. During the pandemic, Leah Remini claimed he staged outbursts for media attention. Although none of these scandals diminished his skill, taken as a whole, they depicted a man whose unrelenting quest for dominance eroded the confidence of those around him. Then in 2017 came The Mummy. It failed at the box office despite being marketed as the beginning of a new cinematic universe. He was accused by critics of taking too much creative control and sacrificing the plot to fit his vision. The failure was harsh for Tom, who for decades had been the epitome of dependability in Hollywood. One coworker said, "You almost forget what it feels like to stumble after carrying success for so long." This mishap was unavoidable, noisy, and public. Tom was rumored to reread headlines and replay interviews when he was by himself at night in an attempt to determine where certainty had given way to error. The man who had been greeted with cheers was now met with silence and worse, mockery. The disdain felt like history repeating itself to a boy who had grown up promising to prove himself to the world. Another crown slipping, another promise broken. In hindsight, his legend was forged during those years. They demonstrated how even Tom Cruise could falter, how praise could give way to skepticism, and how fame could cut just as sharply as it crowned. However, something incredibly human was buried in the collapse. The reminder that even the strongest are susceptible to poor judgment, that conviction without empathy isolates, and that strength without humility breaks. It was unnerving for viewers. It was survival for Tom. The one thing he had always known how to do, climb back, bruised but unbroken toward redemption, was made possible by the storms that battered his name. Tom turned to his own body, the only battlefield he could still control after love had broken him. He would fight pain with the same tenacity he once used to fight for permanence, and if he couldn't keep a family together, he would at least keep himself together, brick by brick. In doing so, his flesh served as both his proof and his prison. Although he has been referred to as fearless, his real enemy was never fear. His body was made of broken bones, torn flesh, and shaky breath. Tom Cruise repeatedly returned to this battlefield. Every jump and ascent that delighted spectators had a cost. When the cameras paused, he was etched with pain rather than acclaim. He jumped an inch too short in 2017 while racing across rooftops in London for Mission Impossible: Fallout. Grimacing, the world watched him crash into a wall and scramble back up. The sound that only he heard, a snap deep inside his ankle, a searing pain shooting up his leg, was what the rest of the world missed. He later recalled thinking, "That's real," as he gazed at the playback monitor. "I'm truly breaking there." Nevertheless, he completed the take. The doctors advised him to take it easy. He nodded, grinned, and went back to work weeks early. A silent scream with each step. Years later, he admitted, "I had to keep moving because stopping felt worse than the break itself." It wasn't just that ankle. He had multiple fractured ribs and a torn shoulder from years of collisions and crashes. Another stunt pushed him over the edge of death in 2023. Every breath scraped inside his chest like glass, causing his ribs to splinter. Crew pleaded with him to stop. He gave a headshake. He told them that pain subsides, film endures. Nevertheless, he filmed because to him, the show was public and the pain was private. The spectacle caused audiences to gasp. Between takes, he let out a silent gasp. The risks pushed him to the limit even when bones held. He practiced holding his breath underwater for more than 6 hours straight for Rogue Nation. He appeared calm on screen. Safety divers circled off-screen, poised to pull him from the precipice. His body screamed for oxygen as he came out pale and trembling. He later acknowledged, "You realize how vulnerable you truly are." Half warning, half confession. Clinging to the glass of Dubai's Burj Khalifa is perhaps the image that best captures who he is. Below, the city extended for thousands of feet. His hands split and bled against glass and steel, but nothing caught them, even though the harness would catch him if he fell. He recalled thinking, "If I let go, that's it," as he looked down once, the world a blur of light beneath him. He demanded it of himself, so each pull upward was more than just a show. It was a silent punishment. Tom never stopped, not because his body was unbreakable, but because it wasn't. Every scar turned into a record of the expenses incurred to continue. Behind the box office successes was a secret chapter that included every night of ice packs and insomniac pain. No one noticed the years of suffering that preceded the moments when Tropic Thunder made people laugh, or when Top Gun: Maverick brought him back to life as the final great movie star. His career is frequently summed up in terms of billions, box office records, and iconic pictures of a man hanging from skyscrapers and airplanes. However, his most authentic tale is inscribed in scars, skewed bones, persistent pain, and recollections of hospital rooms where he vowed to rise again. The fact that Tom Cruise rose not because he was unbreakable, but rather because he refused to let his brokenness be the end of the tale, may be his most human truth. At 63, Tom Cruise is trapped in a paradox that only he could have created. His empire appears to be unstoppable on paper. 4 decades of refusing to give up resulted in an estimated fortune of $600 million. With its sleek steel and glass design that opens onto a shimmering pool, tennis courts that stretch out under the California sun, and a private bar that is stocked like a holdover from Golden Age Hollywood. His $14 million Beverly Hills mansion rises like a mid-century fortress. In addition to being a place to live, the house is meant to declare permanence, which is something Tom's early years never provided. His properties create a network of havens across America that extend beyond Beverly Hills. He once owned a vast mountain retreat in Telluride, Colorado, which covered 320 acres and featured private trails, a hangar for landing his helicopters, and rolling meadows and snow-capped peaks. The estate seemed like a private kingdom, a stronghold of seclusion where the boy who had previously wandered from house to house could at last gaze upon immovable, expansive land that was his. His name has been associated with opulent penthouses in New York that are situated far above the city, and glass towers that overlook Central Park, where the skyline stretches out like a horizon in a movie. Every sale and purchase was like a chess move, with a man attempting to secure himself against the ebb and flow of time and memory with each acquisition. The portfolio goes even farther, including sprawling Florida compounds that were once connected to him, private properties that keep him out of the spotlight, and rumors of secret locations in Europe that are hidden from view. For him, real estate has always been more than just an investment. It's architecture disguised as armor. In an effort to cement a life that frequently felt fleeting, walls were constructed out of concrete as well as desire. Nevertheless, the paradox persists regardless of the size of the empire. Castles become oddly quiet when there is no laughter within them, and marble floors cannot reverberate with the coziness of a family meal. Another type of autobiography written in steel and speed can be found in his garages. Every curve of a BMW 7 Series exudes quiet authority. Once the fastest car on the planet, the Bugatti Veyron is now a speed blur that has been captured in time. A Chevy Corvette C1 that has been polished to a sheen, like a remembrance of the boy who wanted to get away. A loud, unrepentant Dodge Challenger SRT8 that served as a reminder that a part of him had always been fighting gravity. A life lived between luxury and peril, nostalgia and defiance. Each machine is more of a confession than a possession. Nevertheless, despite all the abundance, silence is more powerful. When they laugh, castles reverberate. Children's play does not cause pools to ripple, but they do shimmer. His body is sculpted with military discipline, and he trains as if time were an enemy. His body is still a wonder at 63. It can still run and hold on to steel at unthinkable heights. However, there are mornings when the joints become stiff, when a breath tugs against ribs that never healed properly, or when an ankle that was broken years ago hums like a cruel reminder. He once acknowledged, "The stunts stay with you. You remember them. Your body won't allow it." However, his bones do not bear the deepest wound. It runs in his family. Since 2012, he has observed his daughter Suri's development from a distance using pictures and other people's words. At one point, he whispered futures that only she could hear while carrying her everywhere. Her life now takes place in a world beyond his reach. And it was more than just a signature on paper when she decided to use her mother's last name in 2024. It was a door that closed quietly but irrevocably, an eclipse of legacy. "I am able to leap from airplanes," Tom admitted. "I know how to climb towers, but I don't know how to climb the wall between me and my daughter." His life's greatest contradiction can be found in that sentence, which is straightforward and unvarnished. No stunt can stop a man who overcame gravity. Rumors of romance, brief encounters with Ana de Armas, intimate dinners, and the kind of red carpet looks that ignite tabloids are all present. They have been pictured together laughing and conversing casually, as if they were two actors who are all too familiar with the pressures of living in constant light. As a reminder that connection can still exist outside of the cacophony of a crowd, the companionship feels more like a reprieve for Tom than a spectacle. According to those close to him, he respects her artistry, her fire, and her capacity to shine without being overshadowed by his shadow. For Ana, it might be the allure of a man who, despite his legendary status, still has a strong desire to live. But now Tom is cautious. He is aware that love is brittle in the face of his world's heat, and is not a stronghold but rather glass. He has experienced love that started out as a fairy tale and ended up making headlines. He has witnessed firsthand how easily closeness can be turned into scrutiny. In order to prevent the spotlight that crowned him from consuming what is delicate, he protects this chapter by allowing it to develop away from microphones. The lens, the camera that has never left him, the audience that still rises when his name is spoken, may be his most devoted companion at 63, rather than a partner at all. Perhaps that is the paradox of Tom Cruise's heart. He has dedicated so much of it to the film industry that, despite the whispers of love at his side, his most sincere commitments remain to the art form that saved him and the strangers who wait in the dark for him to jump again. In retrospect, Tom Cruise's story is not one of wealth, but rather of what that wealth was unable to fix. The cars and mansions are immaculate. The crowns of the box office continue to shine. However, other images are reflected in them. The quiet of corridors where kids used to giggle. The pain of love he was unable to maintain. The toll of a body that has endured pain no one else will ever experience in exchange for every cheer. His life reveals a harsher truth than any broken bone. No matter how brilliant, no star can buy back time, trade praise for presence, or erect barriers high enough to keep regret out. However, the other half of his legacy is contained within those losses. Greatness is found in the more subdued endurance of heartbreak, alienation, and aging, as well as in the audacious leaps that left us gasping for air. A person's life is measured by what they carry as well as what they win. His story turns into a mirror when he loses. Dreaming is risking breaking. Losing is a risk of love. And to live is to rise again. Not because one is invincible, but because there is no other path. That might be the most human truth that Tom Cruise leaves behind. Beneath the spectacle of skyscrapers being scaled and planes being outrun, there is still a man who is flawed, obstinate, and scarred. He has experienced victories, yes, but also mistakes he cannot reverse and decisions that have caused suffering for others. He carried regrets for each crown he had won. No round of applause could erase the silences and separations that accompanied every victory. He poured his heart, his joy, and his body into the screen. However, life came with a cost, leaving a legacy of wonder as well as a shadow of longing. Please express your gratitude if his movies or his sacrifices have ever touched you. Leave a tribute, a remembrance, or a word. Because there is still a man who reminds us that greatness is never perfection, even in the midst of billions and headlines. It involves bearing the wounds from our mistakes, acknowledging the gravity of our regrets, and still mustering the strength to get back up. The most difficult stunt is not a cinematic one, but rather a human one. Clinging, letting go, stumbling, starting over, and continuing.